Figure it out.
Hello, this is Adam Koralik from Figured Out Productions. The following video is a video of some kind, and I hope you enjoy it.
Hey guys, it's Adam here, and today we're going to be talking a little bit about the PlayStation 5, the recent speech made by Mark Cerny, as well as some of the legacy history here going into the PlayStation 5. But before we do all that, I just want to say I hope everybody out there is safe with the whole CV situation that I guess I'm still not allowed to talk about on YouTube, but whatever. You guys know exactly what I'm talking about, and that will actually be relevant to this video as time goes on. So first and foremost, let's talk about the actual event that went down. Mark Cerny, who is one of the heads of PlayStation, he's I believe the lead engineer for the PlayStation team. He actually designed the PlayStation 4 and is designing the PlayStation 5. Came out and gave a speech about the technical aspects of the PS5. Now, look, I'm not a news channel. A lot of YouTubers will just make videos about stuff that happens and just be like, you know, like I don't do that. Like I try to like let it digest a little, get some more information, process it, and then kind of make more of a discussion. So I'm not here to sit down and be like, here's all the technical breakdown of everything that happened, and here I'm going to rant about backwards compatibility or whatever. Some of that will be in this video, of course, but that's not what I'm here to do. I want to talk about maybe I guess I would call it the marketing future of the PlayStation 5 and its viability. Can it actually work? And how did we get there? So I'm not saying it'll flop, by the way. That's not at all what I'm saying, so don't misinterpret. But let's before we get to that, the speech itself. Mark Cerny, like I said, he came out and he just talked about it. And everybody's reaction to this has been like, dude, why was that so boring? You know, like, he was just a guy standing on a stage, very dry, he couldn't communicate. Why is this the way you would introduce all this information? It should be a big show and all that. And I'm thinking, like, are you guys paying attention to the world we're in right now with all the CV stuff? Everyone is in lockdown. Everyone's at home, or everyone's on minimal crew as far as shows go. So even your late night comedians, like your late night with last week tonight with John Oliver. Have you seen the latest ones? It's bizarre. He's just in a white room by himself, and it's awkward to watch. Or even like wrestling, the WWE is completely shut down, except for the actual wrestlers. Like, that's the only sport still going. All the, if you call it a sport, really. I mean, it is. Wrestling's a sport, but you know what I'm saying. It's fake. But there's no audience. It's awkward. We live in really strange times right now. Really strange. And hopefully a lot of this passes soon, but that's different. But that will actually, like I said, it's relevant to this because for two reasons. That's one of them, which is I think Sony was just doing this as a safety measure. You know, like, they had to just kind of send one guy out there on a minimal crew situation with no great show because they just had to get the information out. Mark Cerny is not only a known figure within the video game industry, he's also going to be the guy who knows the absolute most about the technical aspects. But he's not an actor. He's not out there to perform and entertain you. He's just there to give you information. So when you do these other conferences, your E3 speeches or whatever, granted Sony hasn't done one of those in a while, that's why they try to give him short bursts in time and mix it with other things to kind of hide that the guy talking is not necessarily the most interesting person. But you can't do that in this situation. So I completely give him a pass for how boring he was, because even late night comedians are boring right now because it's just a weird time. It's just how it is. So if you wanted to spice it up, this would have been my last minute suggestion for Sony. You know who Mark Cerny looks incredibly similar to? Dana Carvey of SNL fame. You know, he was Garth in Wayne's World. I'm sure you guys know him. He looks hauntingly like him, to the point when I see Mark Cerny, sometimes I'm convinced it's Dana Carvey just in a slight costume. Barely at all. Like, this is my interpretation of a nerd. And that's just, he dresses up and that's Mark Cerny. So, like, if there's this, have you ever seen the two of them in the same place at the same time? They might be the same person. No, I'm just kidding. Because what has Dana Carvey done since Master of Disguise in 2002? Not much. Maybe he's been designing PlayStation hardware. I'm totally kidding. But, yeah, so my joke is basically like, you should have, you know, coached him and then brought him out on stage and had him pretend to be Mark Cerny. That's as entertaining as I could ever realistically, and obviously they would never do that. The other thing with CV you have to remember is it's affecting production cycles. So basically, China is unable to build stuff right now because of the current situation, and let's keep it real, these consoles are going to be made in China. Now, at this point in the game, I'm not sure that's necessarily a problem, although they're probably getting backed up with other situations. But it's possible, if the situation isn't resolved relatively soon, that the consoles will be delayed until 2021 simply because they will not be able to build enough units. Or they'll have a small amount of units. It's hard to say exactly. I'm hoping as a result of all of this that these consoles, or in general, a lot of manufacturing can be brought over to the US and we can start doing it back home again like we used to. But I mean, that's more of a political issue and that's not really at all what I'm here to get into. But keep in mind that the dates may change. I was originally projecting that it would be like November 13th and November 20th of 2020 for each console. One or the other would choose the other day. But now it is entirely possible, realistic almost, to say that it may not happen until 2021. And all he did was talk about the technical aspects for the most part. Now, on paper, what it basically broke down to was the PlayStation 5 appears in most regards to be less capable than the Xbox Series X. Appears. We'll get to that. But in most regards, it seems from a technical perspective, it's less capable. And he also actually went into detail about the RAM situation. Historically speaking, RAM has always doubled in every console, but in order for them to do that, or sorry, not doubled, it's multiplied by 16. In order for them to have done that with the PlayStation 5, it would have had to have 128 gigabytes of RAM, and there was no reason for that. Times have changed. There's a technical explanation it doesn't matter. Ultimately, at the end of the day, 16 gigs, it's more than the PlayStation 4. It will be a nice performance enhancement, but a lot of what the RAM was essential for is no longer essential because you'll have better load times out of things like hard drives. So it's not as big of a deal. Now, that's all good, that's fine. And the big thing, though, that he made point of, or at least it was mentioned, was that the way it's going to read hard drive data, the I/O speeds will be substantially faster than the Xbox Series X. I don't believe he specifically mentioned this, but he was talking about the aspect. Compared to the Xbox Series X, we now know that on paper anyway, the real world application of that might be that games will load substantially faster on the PlayStation 5 as opposed to the Xbox Series X. That could be the equivalency of Sony's blast processing. It could be like the one thing that's much more capable, so we just market the crap out of that. Now, look, we don't have these consoles in front of us. In fact, while some people actually do have the Xbox Series X just to see it and experience it and tear it down and all that, we don't even know what the PlayStation 5 looks like yet. But, so it's unfair to say like how these will actually perform. We're just kind of guessing. In most regards, it looks like the Xbox Series X might be more capable of higher resolutions and things like that. But in real-world practical performance, the PS5 might be much better when it comes to simply like loading a game or loading a screen or loading a world that you're in. Now, it's one of those things where you go, okay, look, I'm completely pulling these numbers out. These are made up, but it's speculative. Let's just say, for argument's sake, the Xbox Series X can run a game native 4K, no problem. But the load time to get into the world of it is a minute. Let's just say that. On the other hand, the PlayStation 5 might do it in which, okay, our game only runs at 1080p, but it only takes 20 seconds to load. You know, the real world customer would be like, you have the guys who are saying, no, 4K is better, I don't care that it takes longer. Do you though? Like a minute between every single load screen might be really kind of irritating. Whereas only 20 seconds, even though it's not running as high of a resolution, the average customer would be like, I get to play a lot more of the game and I'm making a lot more progress because I'm not sitting around waiting all the time. You know, a minute versus 20 seconds doesn't seem at first on that initial base unit to be that big of a deal. But as time goes on, if every game is always doing that, that's a lot of time. So it's one of those things where we don't know yet how the market will react or how people will react. But it's my guess that people will be more interested in having the console that loads everything faster, even if it doesn't run at a higher resolution, for example. We don't know. We don't know yet. I can't stress that enough. We don't actually know. But if that's how it actually ends up playing out, it's interesting. There's an interesting case to be made there. So, the other thing he talked about a bit was backwards compatibility. Now, he did not explain this very well, and the internet went insane with this, so much so that the next day Sony had to respond to it, which is another one of those reasons I like to kind of wait on stuff like this, because like half of the videos out there, people complaining about backwards compatibility off of an assumption. What he implied was that, okay, PS5 will not play PS1, PS2, or PS3 games. Like, that's just, we know that part. That part's true. But when it comes to PS4 stuff, it will, he was implying that, like, okay, it's not just that all the PS4 hardware is inside the PS5, and so when you put it in a PS5, put a PS4 game in a PS5, it just goes, okay, cool, and just plays it the way it always did. They had to, I'm not going to call it emulation, but let's just say they had to replicate it. I'm not an engineer, I'm not sure what the technical difference is here, but more or less you have to replicate the PS4 experience within the PS5, and then on top of it, use the PS5's additional capabilities to enhance the game. That he made a deal about that, is that it will be better on the PS5. Now, I mean, that's also some aspect of marketing. Better could mean any number of things, but presumably PS4 games that are compatible will run better. The problem was he implied like the top 100 games will work day one or whatever. So people looked at it and then went like, okay, hold on. There's like, including digital stuff, there's like 4,000 plus PS4 titles, and you're telling me only 100 of those games will work? You know, not factual. The next day, Sony came out and said like, look, you don't have to worry about that. PS4 games, like 4,000 plus, are going to work on PS5. Just, it was poorly phrased, but whatever. It'll be a thing. So don't worry about your PS4 games. Almost all of them will work on PS5. But the other legacy ones will not. In stark contrast to, say, the Xbox Series X, where Microsoft is saying, okay, all Xbox One games except for Kinect games will work. And then they say, quote, thousands of original and Xbox 360 games will work. Now, that's a huge improvement. That's much nicer. And I would bet, though, that the majority of that will be Xbox 360 games, as it already was. It would be nice if they added more original Xbox games, as I'm a super fan of that console, but it's my guess that at most they'll add like another 20. You know, like, there's just not enough demand there. Unless they just allow it to actually play games off of the disc, that would be different, but I don't think they're going to do that. That's a different story altogether. Point is, it looks like Xbox is going to win the backwards compatibility war. And now where that becomes interesting requires a bit of a history lesson. So when it comes to Sony versus Microsoft going into the next generation of consoles, there's something you have to understand: the position of each company. Microsoft, obviously they would love it if the Xbox brand did well, but it's not going to make or break them. You know, the Xbox could come out and completely flop. They could do Apple Pippin numbers and they'd be fine as a company. It would suck for them, but they'd be like, whatever. In fact, during the current situation we're in with the whole CV thing, they're one of the few companies who's actually doing better because everybody's inside using like digital services. So they're completely enamored with their Windows-based products or any Microsoft-based product that exists. Sony, on the other hand, not as well. And that's been the case for them for a long time. They're currently paying upkeep on things that are making no money for them in this immediate CV situation. But they're also utterly dependent upon the success of the PlayStation. Unlike all their other divisions, which are, some of them are kind of recovering here and there, but there hasn't been any real hits. And I know the film division is taking a massive hit right now because they can't produce new film content. Movies they attempted to put out completely flop because no one's going to see movies at the moment. So Sony's hurting. So they need PS5 to be successful. And that is a key point between the two companies. Microsoft doesn't need it to be successful, so they can do whatever they want with it. They can go big or go home. It doesn't matter. They don't care. Sony has to be conservative about it. They have to have a hit, because if it's not successful, if the PS5 flops, watch for some serious damage to the Sony corporation, and they may not be around that much longer. I'm not saying Sony's going out of business. Just I'm saying that it could happen, or some sort of forced merger with someone else could occur as a result of a flopped PlayStation 5. Flopped. That is a key to that. A mediocre success, they could probably ride it out. A big hit would be obviously a big hit, but a flop, that would be hard to recover from. But we don't. That's just speculation. So, but let's dive a little bit into it on each end. Microsoft, so because it doesn't matter how much it costs them or whatever, they're able to kind of do things that aren't necessarily profitable. And I hate to keep it real with you guys, because I'm a retro gamer. I know a lot of you are. You're obviously here watching this particular channel, which is largely about retro gaming. I mean, look at what's in front of me. Retro gaming is a small market. It's a niche thing. And backwards compatibility does not really make real-world dollars. It's a nice marketing thing to say you do, but the amount of people, it looks good. It's like, oh, cool, like that's part of the package. Like, it's just something to say that we also do. But it's almost like saying, oh, I bought that console specifically because it plays Netflix. Sure, it's a bonus feature, but there's not too many people that walk into, say, a Best Buy and say, look, there's PS4 and there's Xbox One, and the Xbox One plays Netflix. I know the PS4 does, but like, that isn't enough, you know? Backwards compatibility is cool, but it's just something you add to the list. And then numbers have shown this, that there's just not enough people that actually care enough about backwards compatibility, even amongst the retro community, to buy the console specifically for that. It's more like, once they have it, they like using it to an extent, but that's not why they put their money down. But that said, Microsoft can afford to put that on the list. So they're going to give you, like I said, Xbox One compatibility, and then presumably a lot of 360 and original Xbox, so they claim. Cool. But the hardware also kind of has to be there in a lot of regards. And that's where it's kind of important to kind of speculate here. The Xbox One, as it is currently, has within it a Blu-ray lens, a Blu-ray drive, which also includes a DVD drive and includes a CD drive. Now that's actually kind of significant because when it came to the PS4, it didn't have a CD drive. People kind of joke about it, like, who cares? I can't play music CDs, a format from the 80s on my PS4. I don't care. One of the reasons you should have cared to an extent is the reason they removed that was a cost-cutting measure. And I assume that will carry on to the next one. To elaborate though, you need to understand something. When it comes to these consoles, and the PS1 used CD-ROM technology. The PlayStation 2 used CD-ROM and DVD technology. PlayStation 3 used CD-ROM, DVD, and Blu-ray technology. Then they whittled it down, getting rid of the CD drive. The reason that's significant is you can't play PS1 games, even though the hardware could totally do it. An emulator could totally be written for this thing. Hell, there's an emulator on the PS3 to play PS1 games. The only thing it's missing is the actual lens to detect the games. And that would eliminate all the blue discs from the PlayStation 2. That's why they never did it, is the hardware's not there. You could have done DVD-based PlayStation 2 games, but instead they decided there's no money in that, so we'll just get the diehards to rebuy it digitally, and we'll just pick some of the best select titles. That's their approach to backwards compatibility. That's not backwards compatibility at all. That's ripping off your customer base. That's what that is. And then PlayStation 3 is unique because its hardware is so complicated, even though it's Blu-ray based, the games themselves, I still think they just can't really replicate it properly, and it's not really worth the effort to try. So, little history lesson here. Is that ultimately resolved is that I think that they can't really do proper backwards compatibility into the PlayStation 5 because it's not going to have a CD lens. And I'm going to speculate here, I don't think it's going to have a DVD lens in it. It will have a Blu-ray drive, obviously, that's their format, but I think they're going to eliminate DVD as they were probably thinking, like, look, what is the point of this? Nobody really watches DVDs anymore. It's an unnecessary expenditure. I think it would be the only Blu-ray player without a DVD compatibility, but maybe that's where we're at now. Because like everybody's watching movies on streaming, and of course Blu-ray is Sony's format. That's also the format you need for the games. But other than that, you don't really need it anymore. And so I'm guessing that that's one of the reasons you couldn't possibly have backwards compatibility with PS2 is because there won't be a DVD lens, which brings it down to PS3. And as I just said, the architecture of the PS3 is so complicated, it's probably just not worth Sony's time. They just don't care because they know it's not going to really yield any money. Hence, you're only getting PS4 support, and you're getting it, through this update type of system. That's what I think's happening there. Unlike Microsoft, who's like, whatever, put everything under the hood. I don't really care. And I just think I think there's something to that. We will see. Maybe I'll be dead wrong. It'll come out, and it'll be able to play DVDs, and then that argument doesn't hold water. Then you just have to say, well, give us PS2 support, which they won't do. But it's interesting to think about. Let's talk about the marketing for this console and when it comes out in the future. Like I said, PS5, Sony's all in. They need this to work. It needs to function for them. They need to be massively successful. Now, what was their strategy throughout the previous consoles? I think that's important to understand historically so that you can see where they are and what they might be doing. So when it comes to the PS1, I did a whole video series about the 5th generation of consoles where I explained this in greater detail, but I'll break it down very, very simply right now, which is at that point in time, historically, the world was ready for another console company to come in, and it could have been like anybody, but Sony did it, obviously, and they also found kind of an exploit, a hole in the system, which was at the time the two big competitors were Nintendo and Sega. And Sega made mistakes, lots of them, but their primary mistake in that generation was that the Saturn was too expensive, too complicated to program for, and really didn't have particularly attractive software to a Western fan base. It had some good stuff in Japan. It had some decent stuff here. I'm not saying it didn't, but not enough to make people care, to make them open their wallets and spend the kind of money that the Saturn cost to get uglier results. Because the Saturn was not a 3D console. It was a 2D console with 3D elements, and then all of a sudden they were forced to use it as a 3D console, so it just didn't look very good. And so people were like, paying more to get less. Sounds awesome. Nintendo, on the other hand, they made a console that was entirely cartridge-based, and so it lacked features, it didn't seem very futuristic, it felt like a child's toy, it felt tad archaic, and on top of that, it really alienated developers who didn't want anything to do with it. They were like, I wanted to work on CDs, they're much cheaper, why are you forcing us into cartridges still? So a lot of developers left them. As a result, there wasn't a particularly big library on the N64. But Sony was kind of right there in the perfect situation. They are like, hey, we have the CD format. Our console's easy to program for. It's also quite capable. Why don't you just work with us? And they did. and then everybody bought the PlayStation 1, one of the highest selling consoles of all time. So that was their strategy. But another key element of that strategy that's important to understand is the PlayStation 1, I believe it was the first console to try this, which is a model of business known as give away the razor to sell the blades. Now what that means is the console will cost them more to produce than they're going to sell it for. So I don't know the original numbers, but let's just say for argument's sake, it cost $300 to build a PS1, and they were selling them for $200. Now when you go, like, why would they do that? They'd be losing $100 per every sale. Correct. That's exactly what they would be doing. But the logic is, once you buy the console, you're going to be so enamored with it that you're going to keep buying games, and that's where the money is. And that totally worked with the PS1. It was a huge success. Now they wanted to replicate that success, logically so, into the PlayStation 2, and they did, but they also upped the ante. In addition to saying this is a new, more capable console, it can do all this stuff, Dreamcast, it can do it better than you. That's kind of what they were going at, even though, you know, that's not the argument I personally would make, as I love the Dreamcast. But from a hardware perspective, the PlayStation 2 could do many things the Dreamcast could not do. That was just one aspect of it to appeal to gamers. But the other thing they also did, like I said, backwards compatibility. At that time, kind of, I'm not going to say unheard of, but it was rare. I can't even think of a console prior to that other than the Atari 7800 playing Atari 2800 or 2600 games that could do that. There wasn't much backwards compatibility prior to the PlayStation 2, but the PlayStation 2 didn't just feel like a new console. It felt like the PlayStation 1, but bigger. I mean, to the point where the controller ports were the same, memory card ports were the same, all this stuff was the same. The idea was to carry that fan base over that was so big. But also, the biggest thing about it was to market it to an entirely new group of people. And that's when they introduced the DVD player into this thing. Now, DVD at that time was just starting to crop up. It was time for VHS to go away. It was archaic, it was annoying, it was old, it was time for it to go. Laserdisc didn't really work out, but these DVD things, they were going to be big. And Sony said, let's get in front of that. We will put out the cheapest DVD player on the market. People will buy the console for that reason alone, and once they have it, they'll be like, oh, I can play my PS1 games? That's cool. I'll play that. Oh, that's cool. It'll enhance my PS1 games. Awesome. Oh, and it's got its own PS2 games. Like I've said in the past, the PS2 launch had almost no actual PS2 games that were really worth touching. That wasn't important. What was important was getting the console sold as a DVD player and then just kind of nursing you and tricking you kind of almost into liking it as a console, and then you get the PS2 experience. And of course they delivered on that. I'm not saying they didn't. The PS2 ultimately had a phenomenal library of video games. But that was the initial marketing move, was get it in the home for that reason. And it worked. This is, to this day, the highest selling console of all time. So, logically, they went into the PS3 with that basic model. And they said, you know what would be cool to up the ante on the PS2 is, I know like we said, we sold the PS1 and the PS2, we built them for this price, and then we sold them for less to get them into the units. That's true. Like I said, they did the give away the razor to sell the blades on the PS2 as well. And it worked for reasons previously stated. But you know where it really hurt us? Is we don't own DVD. We own part of DVD, but wouldn't it be really cool if we came out with a console where we're the dominant name in video games? So every game sold in that generation, boom, we're making money. And we reinvent the video format, and we own every copy of that. Sony owns Blu-ray. You got to remember that. So when they were going into the PlayStation 3, it was like, okay, cool. We'll have this console. It'll be an automatic hit because it's PlayStation. That's just going to happen. Because that's all they knew was massive success. So like, it'll be this huge hit. We'll make money off of every single game. Our console will be more capable. It'll be a little complicated, sure, but that's fine. I mean, it'll be more capable. We can do whatever we want with it. And on top of that, we'll own Blu-ray. Everyone's going to buy Blu-ray. Blu-ray will explode. People forget DVD was even a thing. Forget that. We're going to just explode success into Blu-ray, and we'll make money hand over fist on everything. Didn't work. What ultimately happened is they produced these things, again under that model, they built these things for $900 a unit and sold them for $600. And $600 wasn't exactly cheap for the customers. It was cheap for the hardware, considering what it was costing them, but not for individual customers. Ultimately, PlayStation 3 had to make a ton of changes to kind of get the cost down and just kind of salvage it. It was a good console in the end, but it was a weird situation. So when they went into PlayStation 4, they're like, forget the give away the razors to sell the blades thing, because times had changed at Sony. They were no longer this powerhouse they had been. They were kind of desperate. So with the PlayStation 4, they said, okay, look, these things cost, we'll do it much more conservatively. We'll keep it down. We'll keep down some of the features, including things like the CD lens. We'll just keep some of this stuff out of there. We won't care about backwards compatibility. It doesn't matter anymore, blah, blah, blah. And what we'll do is they'll sell it for $400. They were building these things for $380. This is the first console that Sony made where they're making at least some money on the console, which is weird to think about, but it's true. And then on top of that, you know, we'll once we're in homes, we'll also be successful because of the games model. So that was their plan, and it worked. But one thing that was key to that success, other than regional bias, because something you need to understand about PlayStation versus Xbox, Xbox can only be competitive in 3 markets: North America, Europe, and Australia. It does not work anywhere else. To the point where Xbox isn't even generally released in most Asian countries or South American countries. They just don't even bother anymore. They've kind of learned, with the exception of Japan, but they release it there because they kind of have to for social reasons, but it's never successful there. That said, PlayStation's just kind of gimme in all those regions because they just are. So they'll have that going for them going into PlayStation 5, but in those regions where they have to be very competitive, the Australia, North America, and Europe, Sony might have a bit of a problem. Because going into it, they're not going to have the same advantage they did this time around. The big advantage they had was, in addition to doing everything right, Microsoft did everything wrong. Do you guys remember what was happening with Xbox One when it was first coming out? DRM, online all the time, doesn't play used games, isn't compatible with anything, more anemic than the PS4. Oh, and it costs $100 more because we force you to have the Kinect, a thing everybody doesn't want. I mean, they did everything wrong. And even in their marketing strategy, it was like, don't buy it if you don't have internet. We have another product. It's called the Xbox 360. Away with you, peasant. You know what I mean? Like, they did everything wrong that they could. The arrogant attitude, and then on top of it, it wasn't even really about games. They were like, oh, we know what we care about? TV sports, TV sports, TV sports. That was it was insane how bad the launch of the Xbox One really was. And if Microsoft wasn't literally Microsoft with nearly infinite money, there's no way that console could have survived. It only did because they just kept pumping it and keeping it alive. And of course, you know, they put Phil Spencer in charge, and he pretty much did everything he could to reverse everything of the Don Matrick era. But let's not forget the other side of that coin, which is your primary competition screwed up in every conceivable way. You're going to reap the benefits. In baseball, they have a term for that. It's called errors. When a player really makes success because another player screwed up. That's a lot of sports are like that, to be fair. But at least in baseball, they track it. That's kind of what happened with this. Not saying the PlayStation 4, I'm not taking anything away from it. Sony did things correctly. They really did. But they also capitalized on that success. Go into the PS5. What is Microsoft doing wrong? And the design is ugly. Whatever. I don't know how much of a problem that's going to be. The loading times thing could eventually be an issue. But aside from that, we don't have all the factors yet. We don't know what the PS5 looks like. We don't know the price points. We don't know that stuff. But what we do know is, on paper, for the most part, Xbox Series X will be more powerful. We do know that it's going to play at least all Xbox One games and probably a lot of Xbox 360 and original Xbox games. It might feel more logical for people to transition to that. Now, again, you can't take away from Sony that they are going to have PS4 support, mostly, it sounds like. So that's good. But as I said before, backwards compatibility is only a thing you put on a list and say, like, that helps. Unless it's a unique circumstance, kind of like PlayStation 2 to PS1 was. But yeah, you see what I'm saying? I'm a little concerned about what Sony's going to do another thing. Because each one of these had some sort of unique story to kind of get it into the market, either for better or for worse. PlayStation 5 doesn't have that story yet. We don't know what they're going to do differently. I mean, they're not going to introduce a new video format. That wouldn't matter anymore. Everybody wants, digital streaming. Technically, this is the first time Sony's done a 4K Blu-ray drive, but Microsoft's been doing that since the Xbox One S. So that's nothing new. They can't introduce streaming because that's already a thing. In fact, they abandoned their own streaming service. PlayStation Vue is no longer a thing. Really, what else is there? They're trying to find another trick to market it, and I don't know what that is. Because they're not also, as far as we can tell, they're not launching any sort of handheld along with it. They're not trying to do a Switch type of thing, as far as we know. Unless that's the reason they haven't revealed the PlayStation 5 design, is they're doing the kind of the Switch dock model or something, but even that's not new. It would just be different. But Sony's never really had massive success with portables, so I don't know, man. I'm not saying it's going to flop. Do not misinterpret this at all. I think that the PlayStation 5 will probably do fine. I simply am saying that I don't know yet what they're going to do to outperform Xbox in those 3 regions. Like I said, I give you that they're gonna wipe the floor with them in every other region. It's just those 3: North America, Europe, and Australia. And even when you break those down, most of mainland Europe is PlayStation territory. Xbox can cut it there, but they probably can't win it unless they have some other trick up their sleeve. The UK is a bit of an exception. US and Canada is the easiest place for Xbox to ever historically function. And then Australia is kind of a 50-50, it seems. But we'll see. I'm just curious what Sony or Microsoft will do to ultimately differentiate themselves as opposed to what we currently know. What we currently know, like I said, when you boil it all down, the Xbox Series X will probably be more capable, but the PlayStation 5 will probably have better real-world performance for the average customer. And then a lot of the other features are kind of the same things you would expect. They're going to have external hard drive support. PS5 is going to do it correctly, where they also allow you to upgrade the internal drive. Microsoft, once again, is not allowing you to do that, and I hate that to no end. Microsoft will be doing backwards compatibility more correctly, but after that, what do you have? Phil Spencer and Xbox's stated goal and strategy seems to be the Xbox has to be the home for all of your gaming needs. It has to be that thing that Netflix once aspired to be, which was the one service with all the content. Sony doesn't have that. So right now, things are, if I'm honest, things are looking better for Microsoft going into this generation than they are for PS5. So that's why I think Sony hasn't revealed the console. Is they're possibly market testing those little prototypes just to see what fans' reactions to it are. Because again, they have to get it right. They can't afford to have this thing flop. But at the same time, maybe they're thinking like, what else? What else can we do last minute to just make this thing more exciting, other than just banking on, hey, it's the next PlayStation? Because that's not enough. It's never been enough. Never been enough. It has to have something else to it, or their opponent has to completely suck. But yeah, that's pretty much it. So hopefully you guys found that interesting. I'm curious what you guys' thoughts on all of this are. If you guys could please like, comment, subscribe, all that stuff, and check the description for follow me on Instagram, Twitter, all that stuff. I appreciate it. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you all later.